Welcome to the Woodside Report, featuring John Baier and Christa Principato.
Our first topic up for debate is human trafficking. Human trafficking is the legal trade of humans in regards to sexual slavery, forced labor, and commercial sexual exploitation.
The types of trafficking are bonded labor, where the victim has to pay off debt in either sexual or physical labor, forced labor, where the victim is threatened into labor against their will, and child labor, in the form of debt bondage, forced recruitment for armed conflict, prostitution, pornography, and illegal drug and arms trade.
The UN estimated that nearly 2.5 million people from 127 countries are being trafficked into 137 countries around the world. In the US alone, 18,000 people from 50 different countries are being trafficked into the country, and 300,000 children are being trafficked within the country. Human trafficking makes an estimated $32 billion of international trade annually.
Since it is often women and children that are victims of human trafficking, feminists have taken strong stances on this issue. Dominant feminism focuses on sexualized domination, including pornography, female sex labor, and rape. This stance emphasizes trafficking as forced prostitution.
Liberal feminism agrees that trafficking is problematic in the sense that it overrides the consent of the individuals, but the liberal feminists argue that sex workers that are willingly in the industry should be allowed to work without it being considered human trafficking, and that human trafficking only takes place if it is without consent.
Like the liberal feminists, Germany believed that legalizing prostitution would promote autonomy in sex work. Now, a decade after prostitution became legal in Germany, it has backfired, and it's really made it harder on police to help victims that were forced into trafficking because they can't tell the difference between who is willingly a prostitute and who has been forced into prostitution.
Because sometimes the people that were forced into prostitution are threatened to tell the police that they are willingly in it, rather than without their consent.
Our second topic, abortion, by definition means the termination of pregnancy by the removal or expulsion of a fetus or embryo from the uterus before viability.
So, it may be difficult to understand that definition without knowing a couple of the terms in it, so we have done the justice of defining a few terms. An embryo is the earliest form of development. By the end of the embryonic period, the embryo is capable of motion, the eyes begin to form, hair begins to grow, and all of the essential organs begin to form.
A fetus is the stage of development after the embryonic stage and before birth. The fetal stage begins 9 weeks after fertilization, and although there are no distinguishing features between an embryo and a fetus usually implies development to the point of being recognizable to its own species, containing all major body organs that are not yet fully developed or functional.
And the last term, viability, refers to whether or not a fetus is capable of living outside of the uterus under normal conditions. So when a fetus or embryo has reached viability, it means that it can survive on its own.
Now we get to the stances. The pro-life stance is the embryo or fetus is a human being with the right to life. Getting an abortion is equivalent to homicide.
The pro-choice stance believes that it is a woman's choice what she does with her body and whether or not she should get an abortion.
A popular argument in this debate brings up the question of whether or not a fetus or embryo is a human being. Those who believe they are considered human beings are highly against abortions because every human has the right to live. Zygotes, the earliest form of embryonic stage, contain human DNA and other human molecules. Therefore, it is undeniably a human.
Whereas the zygote contains human DNA molecules, the vital organs are still not fully developed until the end of the fetal stage, let alone the embryonic stage. So, with that being said, 68% of all abortions occur by the end of the embryonic stage, where the embryo is not yet a person because it has not yet developed the organs of a human.
Whether you consider an embryo or fetus a human being or not, there is no denying the fact that it is living. In fact, even a zygote meets the 4 criteria needed to establish biological life: metabolism, growth, reaction to stimuli, and reproduction.
That's great, John, but these living zygotes and embryos, they are not living on their own. They are completely dependent on their mothers. So yes, they are living, but really it's the mother's life that is making these embryos and fetuses kind of run. So is it really living? When an abortion occurs, the embryo is not yet viable, as we talked about before. So in other words, it is not capable of living outside of the uterus on its own.
You're so right, Christa. Wow.
A hot topic in the US right now is gun control. Is there too much or too little? When the Second Amendment, which explicitly states that all citizens have the right to bear arms, was created, it made sense because it wasn't uncommon for civilians to create local militias as a form of protection. Nowadays, however, it has come into question whether or not guns are as necessary for the average civilian to carry.
Some people, especially from more rural areas, tend to argue that guns are not only critical for self-protection, but provide harmless outlet for sports and leisure.
On the contrary, some people, usually from more urban areas, would argue that there are too many guns in circulation, which has threatened the safety of millions. Take, for example, all of the mass shootings that have occurred, like Sandy Hook, Columbine, Virginia Tech, and many more. With less guns in circulation, or with more gun control laws, these tragedies would have been less likely to occur. It is a lot harder to perform a mass killing without a gun.
Actually, if the victims in these situations were also armed with guns, they could have potentially protected themselves and prevented casualties by stopping the gunmen.
That may be true, but imagine the chaos that would have ensued if everyone just whipped out a gun and started firing recklessly. Not only would this make the situation more dangerous, but it would make it nearly impossible for the police to distinguish the shooter upon arriving at the scene.
So you would rather have a bunch of defenseless and innocent civilians left to be brutally massacred by a single gunman, when they legally have the right under the Constitution to protect themselves in the form of bearing arms?
Ooh, shots fired! Now, we are going to be talking about the War on Terror.
The War on Terror is an international military campaign that started as a result of the September 11th terrorist attacks on the US. The goal of this campaign is to eliminate Al-Qaeda and other militant terrorist organizations in countries like Iraq and Afghanistan.
We were going to discuss the pros and cons of this campaign, but it turns out that there really weren't many pros, other than the introduction of minor women's rights in Afghanistan and the execution of Osama bin Laden. The cons, on the other hand, proved to be much more abundant.
$1.3 trillion. That is how much money the US has spent on this war in the span of 10 years. What was the money going towards? $806 billion were allocated to Operation Iraqi Freedom, and $444 billion was spent on Afghanistan. All this money, and yet the Taliban is still in power.
So what exactly was accomplished? Well, there were at least 227,000 casualties in this war, and over 51% were innocent civilian casualties. So not only did we waste billions of dollars, but we didn't even kill the enemy. Sure, we killed bin Laden, but he is not the only member of Al-Qaeda, so the threat remains.
Are we going to spend $1 trillion to get retribution against every individual person that has wronged America? How about we put that money towards fixing domestic issues to protect the lives of our citizens rather than letting them die in a pointless war?
The answer is no.
Oh, Haley, we didn't see you there. It's not every day that you stumble across a headline reading, "Teenager hated his selfies, so he tried ending his life." I was constantly in search of taking the perfect selfie, and when I realized I couldn't, I wanted to die, said 19-year-old Danny Bowman. After spending 10 hours a day taking over 200 selfies, this young man was driven to attempt to take his own life in December of 2012.
While this may seem like a silly and unrealistic story, there is more behind it than just the perfect selfie. Like thousands of other people around the world, Danny Bowman may suffer from body dysmorphic disorder, a mental illness that causes individuals to be excessively concerned and preoccupied with the perceived effect of their physical appearance. This brings us to the question why Danny had not been properly diagnosed and treated before the attempted suicide.
According to studies, 1/4 of all Americans meet the criteria for having a mental illness. A majority of these people will remain undiagnosed and untreated because of the lacking mental health services within the U.S. In fact, only 5.6% of the national healthcare budget is allotted to mental illnesses. Additionally, access to mental health care is worse than other types of medical services, making it harder to receive treatment. Luckily, the Affordable Care Act creates more mental health mandates to require insurers to include treatments for mental illnesses in their benefit packages.
As the mental health system continues to grow, hopefully there will be an increase in treatment and a decrease in selfie suicides.
Should I go home with him? I guess I took a good selfie. Let me take a selfie.
The other stance is the pro-choice stance, and
I hate that thing so much.
My computer tells you what time it is.
oh my god.
Okay, let's start
Alright.
that over. While this may seem like a silly... Lara, I hate you. Sun is all... Dominant feather... Dominant feather... Oh my god, I hate the word feather. Dollars were allocated to the Operation Iraqi Freedom.
And
That is how much money the U.S. has spent on this war since... I am preoccupied about a perceived effect of their...
John, you were so good! Alright, we're gonna
It's the
breathe.
only way. Help me. Okay, ready?
Yes.
Hold it. This brings to us the question, why Danny had not been properly diagnosed. Metabolism, growth reaction to stimul, and reproduction. Wait, stimuli.
Alright, ready? It's
Stimuli.
metabolism, growth, reaction to
Oh
stimuli.
my god. Arms?
Ooh, shots fired.
Are you still doing guns?
Shots fired. Mental health mandates to...
I'm so sorry.
Welcome to the Woodside Report. You guys.
Wait, you look too soon.
Featuring John Baier and Christa.
1, 2, 3.
The answer is no.
2.
The answer
is no.
The answer is no. The
answer's no.
The answer
answer's no.
is no. The answer is no.
That's good.
The answer is no.
They keep getting worse, I feel like.
The answer is no.
No.